powerful hand. Will y'all indulge me for just a moment? Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah. Lord, come through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Bread of heaven, bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. Then about that time, one of the mothers in the church I grew up in would get happy, and she'd raise her voice and say, Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy on my soul. Lord, have mercy. Y'all sound real sweet. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy on my soul. God, indeed, that is our prayer, that is our petition, that you would guide us as we pilgrim through this barren land. God, we've come now to the time that you've set apart for preaching, and so would you be that bread of heaven that feeds us until we want no more. God, for any of our feebleness and frailty that we've brought to this place, will you have mercy upon us right now? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, indeed you are my strength. Now, God, you are my Redeemer. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, this indeed is the day that the Lord has made. We've come to rejoice and be glad in it. I was glad when they said unto me, come, let us go to the Bella Vista Church on Father's Day Sunday. It's good to see y'all, and obviously I'm not Pastor Davis, so I'm not continuing Pastor series. Will you partner in praying with me for our pastor and first family as they laid to rest their dear mother-in-law for Pastor Davis and First Lady's mother yesterday here at the church? Will you pray with me and for me? Because I got the text at 4 o'clock, and we're going to see what the Lord has to say from those hours. I'd like to call your attention to the Old Testament book of Judges at chapter 16. Wingate, if I could get just a little bit more in the monitors, please. Judges chapter 16. Look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, Reverend going to preach the whole chapter. But for the sake of brevity, I'll only read the first 4 verses. Judges chapter 16, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Here's how my Bible reads. One day, Samson went to the Philistine town of Gaza and spent the night with a prostitute. Word soon spread that Samson was there, so the men of Gaza gathered together and waited all night at the town gates. They kept quiet during the night, saying to themselves, when the light of morning comes, we will kill him. But Samson stayed in bed only until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the town gate, including the 2 posts, and lifted them up, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and carried them all the way to the top of the hill across from Hebron. Verse 4, sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah who lived in the valley of Sorek. Verse number 5, the rulers of the Philistines went to her and enticed Samson to tell you what makes him so strong and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. Thus concludes the reading of God's word. As you take your seats in the house of God, I want to preach from the thought of fatal attraction. Fatal attraction. Anyone who's known me any length of time knows that I had a love affair while wrestling with the call to preach. As a boy, preaching was never on the forefront of my mind. I am the son of a pastor. Never wanted to stand and look at the people and declare God's word. In fact, I wanted to work in law enforcement. Didn't want to be a patrol deputy for the sheriff's office. I wanted to go to college, get a degree, and work for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I didn't want to just be an FBI agent. I wanted to work my way up the ladder and become the first black director of the nation's largest investigative service, which to this day, since her inception in 1908, has never had a person whose skin has been kissed by nature's sun leading the investigations. But the Lord had different plans. He didn't let me go be a law enforcement investigator. Instead, he allowed me to be an investigator of his word. But my love affair with investigations never ended. It simply became a hobby. A hobby that led me to discover a series on TV One entitled Fatal Attraction, a show that follows homicides rooted in romantic relationships gone sideways. It's easy to judge the victims while we watch the show because the producers give us the end before they give us the beginning, while they're looking at life through rose-colored glasses, hoping that something better will come out. And such is the case when you and I plant our feet in the sand of Judges 16. We turn our eyes to the death of Samson. You and I are called in as the homicide investigators, tasked with uncovering what led to his demise. Picture it, if you will. You're at home, and your eye scroll lights up. It's early in the morning. It's dispatch calling. Building collapse, multiple casualties, one body found in a position that doesn't quite make sense. You get dressed, throw on your tunic, jump on your department-issued horse, and make the gallop toward the scene before Good Morning Israel beats you there. And when you arrive, the first officer on scene meets you and gives you the rundown. There were rocks, there's rubble, there's bodies everywhere. But one body stopped us cold because we recognized him from last night's All Points Bulletin. This is Samson laying under these rocks. Something terrible has happened here, and that's where you come in. The question becomes, who is Samson? How did this happen? Samson is the leader of the Israelites, a people under oppression by the Philistine regime. He's their deliverer. He's strong, elusive, and dangerous. The Philistines must have gotten the break they finally needed, but what our investigation is about to uncover goes much deeper than a building collapse. We're about to uncover the danger of a gifted life. The principal danger of a gifted life is not the absence of grace, but the gradual, almost imperceptible discounting of it. Yet the mercy of a gifted life is that the God who gave the gift was more committed to his purpose than Samson was to his own consecration. And don't judge Samson too quickly, because we live in that same tension, guilty of discounting God's sufficient grace, desperately pursuing completion and identity from sources that cannot hold us. Here's all I've come to preach. Discounting grace disqualifies us, but God refuses to allow his grace to be discontinued. You and I are challenged to recognize our propensity, our tendency to live beneath God's grace and reorient our gifted lives around dependence on his sufficiency. Here's the question of the text. How does a person chosen, gifted, and graced by God end up destroying themselves? And can grace reach them at the moment of destruction? Fatal attractions don't become fatal instantly. The red flags exist from the beginning, yet we choose to ignore them. Grace is something we don't deserve. It's something we did not earn, yet we treat the grace of God on our lives as if it belongs to us and is not a free gift that God keeps choosing to give us. We're guilty of discounting God's grace. How does discounting grace turn into a fatal attraction? Fatal attractions first are the result of discounting grace in our relationships. Walk with me for a moment. Samson's pattern of relationships has always been women he didn't need to be with. And before we judge Samson, you and I need to remember that Samson begins acting out because his wife betrays him. Not only does his wife betray him, but his best friend, who's also his best man, betrays him. To make matters worse, all of this is spearheaded by his father-in-law betraying him. He's been betrayed by the people who claim to love him. They smiled in his face while holding the knife to stab him in his back. Of course, Samson is going to end up in spaces and places that he doesn't need to be. And as a result of untreated trauma, Samson begins to discount God's grace in giving him strength and treating it as if it was his birthright. Samson keeps going after women who remind him of the woman who broke his heart, trying to find the fire that he once had. He's seeking a healing from women of what can only come from God. The clearest warning that you and I have discounted God's grace is when we begin to seek from creation what can only come from the divine. This is more than a moral issue. It's a theological conundrum. Because of the pain he's felt, he now acts as if God's presence ain't enough for him. You and I have been there before, friends. Gifted, done things the way we were supposed to, yet it doesn't seem to work out the way we hoped it would. And we ask ourselves, is God's presence enough? We've been there, got the job, got the degree, made some money, but money begins to get funny, change begins to get strange, and we ask the question, is God's presence enough? Thought this was the girl of my dreams for the fellas in the room. Thought this was Mr. Right for the ladies, and somewhere along the line the relationship turned sour, and yet we ask the question, is God's presence enough? Month after month, year after year, nothing seems to change. The question we wrestle with is God's presence enough? And I know why you're looking at me like that, because you don't understand why Samson needs God's presence. It's because he's a Nazarite from birth. His mama dedicated him to God before he was ever born. The Nazarite vow is interesting to understand. It's a covenant of dedication between a person and God. The Nazarite vow is normally taken voluntarily. But in Samson's case, the text says that he's one from birth. He didn't get to make the choice. It was made for him. And more than that, it's obvious that his parents saw something on him, because in Judges 14, his birth story says that the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. The Lord had been working on him early. His parents saw this and gave him to God without the boy's input. Imagine how you would feel. You didn't choose to be gifted. You didn't choose to be chosen, yet God's grace has been infecting you longer than you could remember. And the thing about an infection is that we don't have the say-so in how to treat it. Someone else is responsible for making the decisions. God chose him. His parents dedicated him. And Samson has to live with that. Samson's pain is birthed from his gift. What does it feel like to be gifted? Chosen, but pained by it. He ain't been able to make his own decisions. He ain't been able to do what he wants to do. He wants to get married. He got to find a wife, but he doesn't want one that's going to constantly remind him of the gift that's been placed inside of him. He wants a woman that's going to let him be himself. Let his hair down a bit. He doesn't want an Israelite wife. He falls in love with a Philistine. Chosen, dedicated, but pained, because the first decision he makes for himself leads him down a path that causes him to wind up the biblical character of a fatal attraction. And now when we come to chapter 16, he's with a sister named Delilah. By all accounts, she had to be a brick house, just mighty, mighty. She's got to be about 5'2" and fine too, or whatever Lloyd had to say. Samson finds himself in another entanglement with a woman who means him no good. There's trouble, church, because he's always found seeking identity outside of his consecrated calling. Let me pause for the cause and consider the implications of this on the community. Samson is the judge. His responsibility is to free God's people from whatever enemy binds them. thereby blocks their ability to worship God. But Samson is bound by an inner enemy that always leads to external conflict. Samson's stuck, which means the people are stuck. This community suffering is what my doctoral theological professor would say is Han. It's the collapsed anguish of the heart due to psychosomatic, social, economic, political, and cultural repression and oppression. And dear friend, you'd be hurt too if the one who's sent to deliver you keeps getting ensnared with people he needs to deliver you from. More than that, one scholar reminds us that some of what the Israelites keep suffering through is the result of systems designed to keep them down, and a leader who is still bound cannot lead free people. We can't be free until you're free. This becomes extremely clear to you and I when Samson finally discloses the secret he needed to maintain. I'll come back to it in a moment, but secrecy is seduced out of you when you forget who you were called to be intimate with. He's discounted God's grace in relationships, and fatal retractions are the result of discounting grace in our presumptions. Just walk with me for a moment. I promise I'm going to be done in a few. There's a difference between ignorance and presumption. To be ignorant means you don't know something. To presume is to be audacious enough to do something. In this context, it's the audacity to act on the continued availability of what you've never stopped to resecure. It's to keep using something you were given without ever pausing to say thank you or checking if you still have it. Let me see if I can illustrate it this way. When I was a kid, my sister and I would go to my grandmama's house, Pops. And at my grandmama's house, she had a cookie jar on the counter. And every time my sister and I would show up to grandmama's house, we'd go stick our hand in the cookie jar because every time we were there was always cookies in the cookie jar. At no point did we ever stop to ask, did grandma have to go refill the cookie jar? We'd simply go in her kitchen, stick our hands in her ceramic cookie jar that sat on the back of the counter. That way we couldn't knock it off on accident. And make sure that there was another cookie there. But when's the last time you ever stopped to ask God if God's power still operates in your life? Samson doesn't do that, and that becomes the problem. He acts as if his power will always work because his power has always worked. He knew that he had God-given power. He wasn't ignorant of this. He's torn lions apart with bare hands. He's killed 1,000 warriors with a jawbone. And at the top of this story, he's exited Gaza carrying the gates of the city up a hill. There's no question if Samson has power. The problem is he never stopped to check it. This is what makes him spilling the secret more than being about being weak-willed, because he'd run out of his power source by the time we come to verse 20. This is why the indictment of that verse is so heart-wrenching for us, because it says, then Delilah cried out, Samson, the lords of the Philistines have come to capture you. When he woke up, he thought, I will do as before and shake myself free. But he did not realize the Lord had left him. He presumed grace would continue regardless of the posture he took. That's the danger that we face when we treat what God has designed to be holy and consecrated as normal. Presumption isn't about theological education. It's a failure of practical application. He didn't allow what he knew to be true to rule his behavior. Samson could write volumes of systematic theology on divine strength, but he did not live what he could have written about. The danger of many of us is that we can announce grace with poignant accuracy, but we live as if it does not matter in the daily choices that reveal what we actually believe. Samson begins to live within his own strength, acting as if it is an eternal gift. It'll last always. He failed to remind himself this is a covenantal gift. This gift exists because of the relationship between him and God. A Nazirite has to be different from the people around him. He's gifted, but he's acting like everybody else. The danger of being chosen from birth is what God calls us to look differently than the people around us, and it's frustrating to us. We can't do what everybody else can do and get away with it because our callings are different. There's something in us that needs to be dedicated to the Lord alone, and Samson acts like everybody else. He acts as if his strength is his alone and not a gift from God. It's Paul David Tripp points this out when saying independent strength is a delusion. This means that your weakness is not the great danger you think it is. Rather, the great danger is your delusion of strength. Because if you're strong, then you don't seek the hold that you so desperately need from the one who is the ultimate source of strength of every kind. Samson thinks he's strong on his own, and that's where the plot begins to thicken. This death moment gets closer. Delilah keeps asking how come he's so strong, and he keeps playing tricks on the answers. She ties him up, raises the alarm, and he breaks free. This time, though, she's begged him and bugged him so long that he finally tells her the truth because he allowed his strength to go unchecked. When he tells her the truth, she lulls him to sleep, ties him up, and cuts his hair. Think of this, though. He presumed that he would never lose his strength, but he didn't catch on to what she was doing from the beginning. His craving for identity from someone who doesn't hold the same intimacy leads him on the road to ruin. Samson loves Delilah, but Delilah doesn't love Samson. She loves the idea of what Samson would bring. Samson is a national fugitive. He's number one on the Philistine top 10 most wanted list. Samson loves the thrill of Delilah, but Delilah loves the thrill of being considered a national hero, the woman who helped capture Samson. Samson loves Delilah, but the leaders have offered her a huge payday, and all she sees is big bags busting out the Bentley Bentayga. Samson loves Delilah, but Delilah wants to spend that. Samson loves Delilah for what she has, while Delilah loves Samson for what she's about to gain. And there's trouble on both sides. Samson is so attracted to the thrill of strength that he doesn't see a setup when it's unfolding right in front of him. Delilah's so attracted to the bag that she's willing to let Samson meet his ruin. And this is why you and I must be surrounded with people who can see destruction when all we see is thrill. They can warn us that danger lies ahead when we want to go full throttle. He presumes that he can make it on his own, but the Lord has taken his hand off him. And Samson doesn't even know it. Discounting God's grace in our lives costs us everything, but grace doesn't let our discounting have the final word. Last movement of the text teaches us that fatal attractions remind us that God refuses to allow his grace to be discontinued. Samson forgot who established him, and when he did, he lost it all. Bible says that he's bound, his eyes are gouged, and he's forced to grind meal in the prison. Sin is discounting God's grace in our lives, and when we do that, it binds us and makes us grind to survive. But God doesn't let his grace stop when we've reached the point of failure. I hate that old saying I heard growing up in church, they fail from grace. I don't think it's possible to have a good theology that teaches that people fall from grace. I think rather that you fall into grace. Grace catches you when you've gone too far and reminds you of who God is. Jude said, now unto him who's able to keep you from falling. Grace grips you when you've tried to let God go. Samson's hair is shaved, but he ain't bald. It's a critical difference between shaved heads and bald. I like to shave my head because it's the only way I can find any sense of cool relief in Texas heat. And when I do, I take my straight razor, sit it to my scalp, and cut the hair at the follicle. If you're bald, that's when you put a little nair on your head, let it sit for a moment, go shower and wash it off because it pulls the follicle out of the scalp. If you shave your hair, you've never taken the follicle out. Delilah shaves Samson's head, but she hadn't removed the follicle. They remove the outward sign of Samson's consecration, but they cannot remove the inward manifestation of God's predestination. God chose him, and there was nothing that could separate God's choosing him from him, which reminds us that whenever God calls us, he'll compel us to do his will until our time is done. You and I can't die in our mess because God still has purpose attached to our lives. This is what my friend Dr. Paul Koistra would call the perseverance of the Savior. There's nothing you and I could do to keep God from acting in our lives, no matter how much we try. If the perseverance was up to us, we'd be done a long time ago. Samson's captured. Samson's bound. Samson's used for forced labor. And while this is going on, the leaders throw a party to their god, Dagon. Dagon is argued to be the god of fertility, agriculture, and weather in Philistine culture. He's placed in direct opposition to God. The leaders began to celebrate. We finally got our man. They call in the best DJs in Philistia. They call in the best bartenders in the land. They call in the best chefs in the region. They begin to throw the party. The party is party, and they're living as if they have the final victory. The music is blaring. The drinks are flowing. The food is being served, and they don't know that there's another movement happening inside the jail. Samson's hair is growing back. He doesn't need blue magic. He doesn't need miracle grow. All that happens is God's grace has not run out in his life. As long as he's got hair, he's got grace. If God's grace were to stop, this would mean that God has changed his nature. And since God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should change his mind, God's nature never changes. God can't stop giving grace because his nature is grace. Samson's hair doesn't grow back because he deserves it, but it's another sign of God's grace. The leaders call for Samson to be brought out to entertain the people. Samson's escorted out and asked that he be placed between two pillars to support himself. I got to leave you now, but I can't leave you without giving you the image of what happens. To stretch his hands between two pillars places him in the shape of a cross. Cross resting between the pillars of life and death, the cross resting between the pillars of God and of humanity. Samson rests between two pillars. And once there, he finds his prayer life again. He says, Lord, yeah, remember me. Remember the calling you placed on my life from the very beginning of it. Remember the strength you placed within me and allow me to use it just one more time. Samson singing his own version of the blues. Otis Moss would say that he refuses to just name an existential darkness. He's seeing a strategy of knowing and a technique of empowerment. Now, I got a problem with how Samson ends his prayer. He shifts the focus on himself. He wants vengeance for himself against those who have taken him captive. He doesn't ask for God to be glorified in it. He simply asks for vengeance. But thanks be to God that he's able to do more than we could ever ask, think, imagine, or pray. I hear Fox cutting through the air. I pull up to the club, VIP, gas tank on E, but all drinks on me. But Samson's hair has been growing back. Samson's starting to get his strength back. They're outside swag surfing, but they don't know the ultimate surf has shown up, and it's about to make his presence known. Samson's placed between the pillars. Samson's prayer has been prayed. His arms are outstretched, and Samson does one more thing. He asks that God lets him die with the Philistines. And maybe it's then that Samson realizes that he could not live with his own strength, but needed to be with the Lord. And after this, Samson pushes down the wall. And when he pushes down the pillars, the rulers die. And everyone in attendance is crushed under the rubble. I've got to leave you here, but this ain't the last time that we see grace cutting through separation. I don't know if you've seen it yet. All I've been trying to tell you is grace isn't something, it's someone. Samson's only a type of Christ because he is not Christ, but grace would show up just a few thousand years later. Grace shows up in Bethlehem. It doesn't need a postcard from Paris. Grace doesn't need a messenger from Morocco. Grace wraps himself in human flesh. The God who spoke to the world chose to enter the world. He does not come into a palace. He does not come into the temple, but he makes his arrival in a barn and makes his bed in a feeding trough. Grace doesn't need to already be established because grace prefers the overlooked. Grace grows up in Nazareth. Grace learns to be a carpenter from his father. Grace lives in relative obscurity, but grace doesn't waste quiet seasons. When grace enters publicity, he steps into the Jordan already leaning and living in our direction. And in 3 years, grace does what we can't do in a lifetime. He lives with complete complete dependence on his Father. And every morning a new connection, every miracle a new manifestation of power that belongs to God. And when they tried to crown him king, grace ran away. When the 12 argued who's greater, grace picks up a towel. Grace taught on mountainsides, and grace taught in the synagogue. Grace ate with sinners and touches unclean. Grace stops for one as the crowd pressed in. Grace healed on days when miracles weren't supposed to happen. Grace forgave folk who never asked for forgiveness. Grace looked at the rich and loved them anyway, because grace is consistent and grace is deliberate. Then one week, y'all, grace changed the world. Grace rides into Jerusalem on a borrowed donkey. The people cry Hosanna, wanting a king, but grace shows up to free them from themselves. Grace goes to the temple and flips tables. Grace sits with the disciples and breaks bread and says, "This is my body." Grace was showing that grace is free, but grace ain't cheap. Grace prayed alone in Gethsemane's garden because the disciples wouldn't stay awake. Grace has sweat that becomes like drops of blood, and grace could have called a legion of angels to come to his rescue. But grace doesn't take the easy way out. Judas comes with a kiss. Peter cuts off an ear, and grace decides to heal it. But that's not enough for them. Grace is arrested and given sham trials in kangaroo courts. Grace is bounced between Pilate and Herod. Pilate washes his hands, but couldn't get the blood of grace out his heart. Grace is sentenced for crimes that he was not guilty of. Grace was given a crown of thorns on his head as a joke. Grace is robed with purple linens as a game. Grace is beaten till his mother could no longer recognize her son. Grace has to carry the instrument that would kill him on his back. Grace is marched through the streets of Jerusalem, almost collapses under the pressure. But Simon of Cyrene is called to help remind us that we're never meant to carry our burdens alone. Grace is marched up the Via Dolorosa. Grace takes nails in his hands. Grace takes a spike in his feet. Grace is hung with arms stretched wide. Grace does what Samson couldn't do. Samson pulls down walls to separate enemies, but God pulls down walls to unite enemies into friends. Grace looks at one man who's executing him and does not pray for their destruction, but prays for their forgiveness. Grace hangs and grace dies. Grace dies until the sky turns midnight while it's still midday. Grace dies until the world trembles like a drunken man. Grace dies until the stars refuse to shine. Grace dies until the moon slips a hemorrhage and drips red in blood. Grace dies until the veil in the temple splits top to bottom to give us unseparated access to the presence of God. Grace dies until sin is satisfied, until the work is completed, until the gap is closed, and the work of grace could no longer be discontinued. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die? Would he devote that sacred head for sinners such as I? Was it for crimes that I had done? He groaned upon the tree. Amazing pity, grace unknown, and love beyond degree. But drops of tears could never repay the debt of love I owe. Here, Lord, I give myself away. 'Tis all that I can do. I got to quit, sweet children, but grace doesn't stay on the cross. Grace is placed in a borrowed tomb. Grace stays in the grave all night Friday. Grace stays in the grave all day Saturday. Grace stays in the grave all night Saturday night. But early the third day morning, grace gives back what he borrows. He steps out the grave on a resurrection ground. Because grace got up, we got a comeback story. For every time we've discounted grace, he's given us another chance. For every time we turn our backs on grace, he's right there in front of us. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. He plants his foot in the sea and rises rides upon the storm, deep in the dark and hidden minds, with never failing skill. He fashions all his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Oh, fearful saints, new courage take. The clouds that you now dread are big with mercy and will break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. That's not how my grandmama taught me. Grandmama said, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. So amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that brought my liberty. I do not know just why he came to love me so. He looked beyond my fault and saw my need. I shall ever lift my eyes to Calvary, to the cross where Jesus died for me. How marvelous that grace that called my falling soul. He looked beyond my fault and saw my need. I feel like hollering a while. Can you do me one favor? Grab your neighbor by the hand. Y'all looking, but y'all ain't listening. I said, do me one favor. Grab your neighbor's hand and tell your neighbor, grace is all over me. Grace woke me up this morning. Grace started me on my way. Grace clothed me in my right mind. Grace let me sleep all night. Ain't God all right? It was grace. Grace.